Parents like to say every child is a part of them. In our house, I was but a splinter under the skin. Mom and Dad were a blended couple. They could not bring themselves to truly punish my stepbrother and stepsister. So they had me and turned me into their cautionary example. When my brother came last in his class, Dad locked me in a dog crate under the blazing sun to teach him what happened to people who refused to study. When my sister started dating too young, Mom drugged me and dumped me in a homeless encampment to show her what could happen if she was not careful. Then one day, Dad found a takeout receipt in the trash. He forced poison food into my mouth and made me swallow. Today, I am going to teach you all a real lesson. This is what happens when you eat whatever you want behind our backs. Even as I coughed blood and writhed on the floor, Dad threw me into the punishment room. My brother and sister rushed to confess and begged Mom to let me out. But Mom only said coldly, "You two will learn this lesson properly today. When you have learned it, I will let him out." I sat on the floor as blood soaked through my shirt. As my consciousness faded, I finally understood. Dad, your last cautionary lesson had to be taught with my life. Megan tugged Dad's sleeve. Dad, please let Zach out. He's coughing blood. Dad brushed her off. No, this is for your own good. You need to see the consequences to understand. Andrew staggered up, eyes bloodshot. Dad, I ordered the takeout. It has nothing to do with Zach. Punish me instead. I'll never order food behind your back again. Please let him out. Dad's lips curved into a smug smile. Now you admit it. When I showed you that receipt earlier, why stay silent? Andrew Reed, you lied to me. How can I trust a single word out of your mouth now? Andrew went pale. I slumped in the corner, my stomach churning violently, breathing the taste of rust. Pushing onto my tiptoes, I pressed my face against the door's tiny glass pane. Dad, Zach hurts so much. Can you let me out? Dad's expression darkened. Why are you so fragile? If you can't handle a little hardship, how will you ever become a man? Bear it. When your siblings learn their lesson, you'll come out. My eyes burned, but I choked back the tears. Dad always said tears were weakness, and weak people didn't deserve love. Forcing a smile, I nodded. Okay, I'll listen, Dad. Andrew dropped to his knees. Dad, I'm begging you, let Zach out. He's too young. His body can't take this. Dad's anger exploded, chest heaving. Andrew Reed, a man doesn't throw his pride away and beg. My teachings go in one ear and out the other. I'm not opening that door today. Begging won't work. Stay out here until morning for all I care. Andrew's face drained of color. A sudden pressure choked my chest. A mouthful of blood erupted from my lips, splattering across the small window. Megan shrieked. Dad stiffened, taking a half step closer before snorting coldly. Stop acting pitiful. Are you throwing a tantrum for attention? Just because you don't want your siblings to improve? This is your purpose. I had you to serve as a warning to them. The more you fake this, the longer you stay inside. Megan froze, wiped her face, and sprinted toward the front door. Zach, don't be scared. I'm going to get help. Megan vanished down the hall. Mom chased her for 2 steps, face flushing red. Fine. Perfect. Every single one of you thinks you can rebel now. Andrew rushed back to the door, hope flaring. Zach, hold on. You're going to be saved soon. The pain in my chest eased slightly at his words. Minutes later, urgent footsteps echoed. Megan burst back in, Mom trailing behind. Mom scanned the room. What is going on? Dad lit a cigarette, inhaling slowly, with a cold chuckle. What else? These 2 perfect children secretly ordered takeout and refused to admit it. He walked over to Mom, chin lifted in smug triumph. This time I'm teaching them a real lesson. No more soft handling. Mom frowned, peering through the glass at me. What did you give Zach? Rodenticide. Dad replied flatly. Mom's eyes widened. How could you give a child poison? Dad laughed out loud, waving his hand dismissively. I'm not stupid. The box expired over a year ago. It can't kill anyone. Mom visibly relaxed, letting out a long breath before turning to Andrew and Megan. Did you hear that? Your father is doing this for your own good. He knows the limits. Why make a public scene? Megan's voice cut through the room. Mom, Zach is throwing up blood. How can he be fine? Mom snapped impatiently, waving her hand. Enough. Expired poison won't do anything. Stop being dramatic. Clenching my fists until my nails drew blood, I dragged myself up against the wall. Mom, Zach hurts. Mom offered a flat, perfunctory smile. Good, Zach. Endure it a little longer for your brother and sister. The sooner they learn, the sooner you come out. We're a family. Don't be so selfish. My grip failed, and I slid back down. Andrew suddenly snapped, slamming his fist into the wall. Knuckles split open, trailing blood down the paint. What kind of sick lesson is this? I don't accept it. I won't learn it. Mom gasped, rushing to grab his hand. How could you hurt yourself like this? Your hand is bleeding. Her eyes instantly welled with tears. Dad's fury flared. Still got the energy to throw a tantrum? Clearly you haven't learned a thing. He whirled, glaring through the glass pane at me. This is all your fault. You just cooperate while we teach your siblings. Must you always be this fragile? The hurt broke me, and tears finally poured down my face. Megan broke down entirely, sobbing hysterically. Dad. Mom, I know I was wrong. I'll never order takeout again. Please let Zach out. Andrew ripped his hand from Mom's grip and knelt beside Megan. I swear it too. I will never order takeout again in my life. Dad and Mom exchanged a glance, both smiling. Dad, lean down, his voice dangerously soft. Then swear it on Zach's life. The words felt like a fist crushing my heart. Andrew and Megan's eyes filled with agony, but they lowered their heads. I swear I'll never order takeout again. If I break this promise, may Zach Reed die a terrible death. Dad nodded, satisfied. See? Was that so hard? If you'd done this earlier, your brother wouldn't have suffered. Mom nodded, stepping toward the door keypad. Before Mom could type, Dad pressed his hand over hers, shaking his head. Wait. They have a history of lying. They lied just minutes ago. Who's to say this swear isn't another lie? Megan trembled with pure rage, but forced it down. To keep me from being trapped longer? What do you want from us? Dad smirked. Andrew comes with me to bandage his hand, and faction is no joke. Megan goes to eat her dinner like a good girl. You've both done your part. I'll let him out tomorrow morning. Andrew stiffened. Tomorrow morning? That long, Zach? Dad's gaze turned. Freezing? Are you questioning my arrangement? Megan pressed herself against the tiny window, tears streaming back. Hold on a little longer. Tomorrow morning I'll get you out. I nodded through the glass, whispering, okay, but the tears wouldn't stop. Dad saw them, shoved Megan away, and glared through the pane. Hold them back. What are you crying for? Did I wrong you? I'm doing this for your own good. Jolting in terror, I wiped my face messily. I won't cry. Zach won't cry. Dad, don't be angry. Dad grabbed Andrew by the arm and marched out. Their footsteps faded down the hall, leaving the world completely silent. I curled tightly into the corner, my stomach twisting as if sliced by a knife. Time blurred before my eyes. Closed in a daze. My dream dad unlocked the door, lifting me gently into his arms, while Mom, Andrew, and Megan stood around us, smiling happily. Then a searing, red-hot iron seemed to plunge into my stomach. The agony violently ripped me awake. I shrieked, thrashing on the floor like a fish out of water. I tried to scream, but bloody foam bubbled up, choking my throat. Andrew and Megan heard the thrashing and rushed back. Zach. What's wrong? Forcing my blurry eyes open, I choked out. It hurts, Megan. It hurts so much. Outside, chaos erupted. Megan sprinted away and returned with a box of painkillers. Zach, take these. It'll stop hurting. I shoved the tablets into my mouth, chewing them dry. The bitter powder caught in my throat, causing a violent coughing fit. Forcing my lips upward, I smiled through the crack under the door. Megan, it doesn't hurt anymore. Megan's voice cracked with tears. Silly Zach, your face is completely white. How much must it hurt? Andrew's eyes went red. Zach, don't be scared. I'm getting you out right now. He frantically punched the keypad, muttering Mom's birthday? No, wrong. Let me try Dad's. His fingers panicked, entering the wrong code 4 times consecutively. On the 5th mistake, the security alarm blared violently through the entire house. Mom and Dad came rushing downstairs, faces twisted in absolute anger. What are you doing? Sneaking around in the middle of the night trying to break a lock. This is theft. This how I raised you? Megan threw herself at Dad, clutching his arm, weeping hysterically. Dad, please let Zach out. Just open the door and let us look at him. Just one look. Dad violently shook her off. He can't hold out. Zach Reed, answer me. Are you playing pitiful for attention again? Every single inch of my body screamed in pure agony. I wanted to answer, but I no longer had the strength to open my mouth. Dad sneered, getting better at your little shortcuts. Aren't you? Now you've learned to act mute. Think this will force my hand? Dream on. Mom hesitated. All right. It is only one night. Maybe let him out. What if something really happens? Dad's voice shot up, cutting her off. No. Finally got them to admit their mistakes and swear. If you let him out now, today's lesson was for nothing. They'll just do it again. Next time. He turned and stormed into the storage closet. Andrew and Megan exchanged a terrified look. Dad. What are you doing? Dad marched back, gripping a can of expanding foam, and sprayed it wildly across the little window. The white chemical foam sealed the pane completely solid. Megan threw herself forward to stop him. Dad. You can't seal it. The room is entirely enclosed. That window is his only air supply. Zach will suffocate. Dad didn't stop. Stop scaring me with death. I had a vent installed when we renovated. Do you think I'm an idiot? I'm sick of this hysterical attitude, acting like I'm some evil stepfather. He finished spraying, glaring down at Megan. Go back to your rooms and sleep right now. Otherwise, I'll shut off the vent, too. Andrew and Megan shook with rage, but Mom grabbed their arms, dragging them backward. Did you hear your father? He's right. You're both too ungrateful. Go to your rooms. Curled tightly into the corner as the air grew heavy and thick. I gasped for breath, but the taste of blood in my throat only grew stronger. Dad didn't know the vent had been broken for years. I wanted to scream it out, but a thick clump of bloody foam choked me. The moment I opened my mouth, my temples throbbed violently as my brain starved for oxygen. I opened my mouth wide, like a fish stranded on dry land, desperately fighting for air, clawing frantically at my own throat to clear the passage. My nails dug deep into my flesh, leaving jagged, bloody marks. In the end, my face swelled purple and my awareness faded into complete darkness. Dawn. Megan ran back downstairs, tear tracks staining her face. Dad. It's morning. Open the door. Andrew stood beside her, hollow eyes fixed on the lock. He hadn't slept a single second all night. Dad calmly straightened his clothes. Why the rush? I haven't finished breakfast. Your brother will be fine. You two spoil him too much. That's why he spits blood every time he wants attention. Megan glared at him, screaming at the top of her lungs. Dad, how can you say that about Zach? Dad's hand paused, his eyes turning ice cold. Shout at me again, and I won't open it today. Megan swallowed her words, tears spilling over. At last, Mom and Dad leisurely finished breakfast. All right. Stop calling out. I'm here, aren't I? Dad walked to the door and entered the code on the keypad. You two watch your brother carefully. He turned his head back, his voice dripping with boastful triumph. Remember, this is what happens when you eat things behind our backs. Whoever dares to order takeout again will end up like this. Dad pulled open the heavy metal door. Light poured into the small room that had been dark all night, laying the terrible scene inside bare before everyone. The heavy metal door groaned as it swung open, letting a shaft of pale morning light cut through the stale, suffocating darkness of the punishment room. For a fraction of a second, the silence in the hallway was absolute. Dad stood, with his hand still resting on the door handle, a lingering smirk of triumph frozen on his face. He expected to see Zach sitting in the corner, eyes red and swollen, perhaps offering a quiet, submissive apology. He expected the lesson to be complete. Instead, the light fell upon a nightmare. Zach lay on his side, his body twisted in a grotesque, unnatural arch. His head was thrown back, his mouth open in a silent, frozen gasp. His face was no longer pale. It had turned a deep, mottled purple, bloated from the desperate struggle for oxygen. His fingernails, torn to the quick, were caked with dried blood, and with shavings from where he had frantically clawed at the solid door and his own throat. A thick, dark pool of dried, foamy blood had erupted from his lips, staining the floor and his tattered shirt a deep, rusty black. The room smelled of copper, bile, and the chemical tang of the expanding foam that sealed the tiny window. Megan let out a sound that didn't belong to a human being. It was a high, choked screech of pure horror that tore from her throat before she collapsed onto her knees, her hands flying to her mouth. Andrew did not scream. He froze, his bloodshot eyes widening until the veins in his whites seemed ready to burst. He took one step forward, then another, his legs trembling violently. Zach. Andrew's voice was a whisper, barely a breath. Zach. Buddy, get up. The door is open. You can come out now. There was no response. The boy on the floor remained utterly, terrifyingly still. The morning light caught the glint of the dry painkiller powder still dusted on Zach's chin, the tablets Megan had given him through the crack, which he had chewed dry in a desperate attempt to make the pain stop. Dad's smirk finally faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion.
He stepped
back, his brow furrowing. Get up, Zach. Stop playing around. The lesson is over. Don't think you can get out of chores today by pretending to be sick. He reached out with his foot, nudging Zach's shoulder with the toe of his leather shoe. The boy's body didn't roll naturally. It moved stiffly, the rigor mortis already setting in. Oh my God, Mom whispered, her hand trembling as she covered her mouth.
She
took a step back, her eyes darting from Zach's purple face to the dried blood on the floor. Arthur, he's not moving. Why isn't he moving? Zach, Andrew roared. He lunged past his father, throwing himself onto the dirty floor of the punishment room. He grabbed Zach's cold, stiff shoulders, pulling the boy into his arms. The body was ice cold, the joints rigid. Andrew pressed his ear to Zach's chest. Silence. No heartbeat. No shallow whisper of breath. Only the cold, empty hollow of a chest that had collapsed under the weight of suffocation. He's dead, Andrew whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at his parents, his face twisted in an expression of raw, unadulterated hatred.
He's dead.
You killed him. You locked him in here, and you killed him. Nonsense. Dad snapped, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. His face had gone pale, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. It was expired. Rodenticide. The box was over a year old. It doesn't kill people, it just causes a mild stomach ache. He's just holding his breath to scare us. Look at him, Arthur. Mom shrieked, her voice rising to a panic-stricken wail, as she finally saw the jagged claw marks on Zach's neck, where he had tried to rip his own throat open just to get air one. Look at his face. He's suffocated. The phone. You sealed the window. I told you the vent was there, Dad shouted, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger toward the ceiling. There is a vent. It's an open system. He couldn't have suffocated. Megan, sobbing hysterically on the floor, dragged herself forward and grabbed her mother's ankle. The vent has been broken since the renovation. 3 years ago, Mom.
Zach told you.
He told you last winter, when the room was freezing, and you told him to stop complaining and grow up. You never fixed it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom stared at the ceiling vent, covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust, completely blocked by old insulation. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, her manicured hands landing in the pool of Zach's dried blood. No, 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 Mom muttered, her eyes vacant. We were just trying to teach
them.
We did it for them. If they didn't order the takeout, if they had just listened. Don't you dare blame us. Andrew screamed, cradling Zach's stiff body close to
his chest.
He rocked back and forth, pressing his forehead against his little brother's cold, purple cheek. You did this. You locked him in a cage under the sun. You left him in a homeless camp. And now you poisoned him and let him choke to death in the dark. He was 10 years old. He was 10. Dad stood paralyzed. For the first time in his life, his absolute authority had crumbled into a terrifying, undeniable reality. He looked at his hands, then at the can of expanding foam still sitting on the hallway table. We need to clean this up, Dad whispered, his voice suddenly sharp, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Arthur, we can say. It was an accident. He found the poison himself. Yes. He found it in the garage. Andrew, Megan, put him down. We need to call an ambulance and tell them he took it by mistake. Andrew looked up, his eyes dead and empty.
No.
Andrew, listen to me. Dad lunged forward, grabbing Andrew's shoulder.
If the
police get involved, your mother and I will go to prison. Do you want your family ruined? Do you want to lose us too? We did this for you, to make you better. Our family was ruined the day you two became our parents, Andrew said, his voice deadly quiet. With his free hand, Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, covered in Zach's blood, smeared the screen as he dialed 3 digits. Don't you dare. Dad lunged to grab the phone, but Andrew dodged, shielding the screen with his body. Emergency services. What is your location? A calm voice static clicked from the receiver. Andrew stared directly into his father's terrified eyes. My name is Andrew Reed, he said, his voice steady, though tears poured down his face. My parents have just murdered my little brother. They poisoned him and locked him in a sealed room overnight.
He is dead.
Please come.
Quickly.
Within 10 minutes, the quiet suburban neighborhood was shattered by the wailing of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed against the pristine white siding of the Reed family home, casting long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawn. Dad had tried to grab the phone, tried to drag Zach's body out of the room to stage a different scene, but Andrew had fought him with a feral, terrifying strength. When Dad tried to strike him, Andrew didn't flinch. He simply stood over Zach's body like a shield, his eyes promising a lifetime of vengeance. Megan had run to the front yard, screaming for help until the neighbors came out of their houses, staring in shock. When the paramedics and police officers burst through the front door, they were met with a scene of absolute devastation. "Step back. Everyone step back," a veteran police officer, Officer Miller, commanded as he entered the hallway. Mom was sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth, her hands covered in dried blood, mumbling incoherently about lessons and good parenting. Dad was frantically talking to a paramedic, his voice high-pitched and defensive. It wasn't an accident. He must have slipped into the room and locked himself in. The lock is faulty. He was playing with expired rodenticide we kept in the pantry. Shut up. Andrew's voice cut through the chaos like a knife.
He was still in
the punishment room, kneeling beside Zach, refusing to let anyone touch his brother. He is lying. Look at the door. Officer Miller walked over to the heavy metal door. He stared at the keypad, then at the window. The white expanding foam was still stuck to the glass, sealing every crack. He touched it. It was hard, completely blocking any airflow. Who did this?" Miller asked, his voice dropping an octave as his eyes hardened. "My dad," Megan sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur.
He sprayed it last
night because Zach was coughing blood and we were begging to let him out.
Dad
said he was faking it. He sealed the window so we couldn't see him. The paramedic who had knelt beside Zach shook his head slowly, looking up at Officer Miller. "The boy is gone. Rigor mortis is fully established. Pupils dilated, cyanosis. One looks like acute respiratory failure combined with
suspected poisoning.
We need the coroner and forensics immediately." The words acute respiratory failure and poisoning seemed to echo off the walls. Officer Miller turned to Dad. "Arthur Reed, you are under arrest for the murder of Zach Reed. You have the right to remain silent." "This is a mistake," Dad roared as the officers grabbed his arms, pulling them behind his back. The handcuffs clinked shut with a heavy, final sound. "I am his father. I have the right to discipline my children. You don't understand what it takes to raise a blended family. I was saving them. I was saving Andrew and Megan." "Save your breath for the detective," Miller growled, shoving Dad toward the
Door.
Mom screamed as another officer grabbed her wrists.
No.
"I didn't do anything.
I
tried to open the door. I wanted to let him out. Arthur wouldn't let me."
It was
"Arthur's idea. You watched him do it," Andrew shouted, his voice cracking with rage as he watched his mother being led away in handcuffs. "You stood there and laughed. You told us it was for our own good. You are just as guilty as he is." As the police escorted the parents out, the neighbors gathered on the street, whispering and taking videos on their phones. The perfect, blended family of the neighborhood was exposed in the harshest, ugliest light. Andrew and Megan were left standing in the hallway. A female officer, Detective Carter, approached them gently. Her eyes were filled with deep sorrow as she looked at the blood on Andrew's clothes and the raw terror in Megan's eyes. "We need to take your statements and we need to get you both to a hospital to be checked over," Detective Carter said softly. "But first, we have to move Zach." Andrew looked back at his little brother. The paramedics were gently placing Zach's small, stiff body into a black body bag. Andrew felt a physical pain in his chest, as if his own heart were being torn in two. "I swear I'll never order takeout again. If I break this promise, may Zach Reed die a terrible death." The words of his own swear rang in his ears, a cruel, mocking echo. He had broken the rules, and Zach had died. Even though he knew his father was the monster who had pulled the trigger, the guilt clung to Andrew's throat, choking him. "I'm sorry, Zach," Andrew whispered, his shoulders shaking as he finally broke down, weeping uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry." The investigation into the death of Zach Reed quickly became a national
headline.
The brutality of the cautionary lessons shocked the public. 2 days after the arrest, Detective Carter called Andrew and Megan, who were temporarily staying with a state-appointed guardian, into the precinct. She looked exhausted, her desk piled high with case files and evidence bags. "I wanted to go over some of the preliminary autopsy findings with you," Carter said, her voice gentle but serious. "And to explain what we are charging your parents with." Andrew sat rigidly in his chair, his hand tightly clutching Megan's. "What did the report say?" Carter sighed, opening a folder. The cause of death was a combination of factors. First, the rodenticide. Your father claimed it was expired and harmless. It was indeed expired, but what he didn't understand is that active ingredients in certain chemical poisons, specifically zinc phosphide, do not simply disappear when the expiration date passes. In some cases, as the chemical degrades, it can become highly unstable. When Zach swallowed it, it reacted with his stomach acid, releasing toxic phosphine gas. It literally burned his internal organs. Megan let out a choked sob, burying her face in Andrew's shoulder. The second factor, Carter continued, her eyes darkening with anger, was the lack of oxygen. The toxicology report shows that if the room had been ventilated, or if he had been taken to the hospital within the first 3 hours, he would have survived. But when your father sealed the window with the expanding foam, and because the ventilation system in that room was completely non-functional, the oxygen levels depleted rapidly. The panic and pain caused Zach's heart rate to spike, meaning he consumed the remaining oxygen even
Faster.
He died of asphyxiation while experiencing acute systemic poisoning. He suffocated in the dark, Andrew said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Yes, Carter said quietly. We also found old, healed fractures in his ribs and fingers. And we found traces of a heavy sedative in his medical history from a year ago, matching the time you said your mother drugged him and left him in the encampment. They kept a logbook, Megan whispered. In the study, Dad kept a leather notebook where he wrote down every cautionary lesson he gave Zach. He called it the Ledger of Discipline. Detective Carter's eyes widened. We will execute a search warrant for that immediately. If we find that, it's over for them. It proves premeditation, systematic abuse, and torture. As they left the precinct, Andrew looked at the gray sky. The guilt was a heavy, physical weight in his stomach. He remembered the takeout receipt. He remembered how he had stayed silent when his father first showed them the receipt, too, afraid of the consequences. If he had just confessed immediately, Zach would never have been poisoned. Andrew, Megan said softly, as if reading his mind. It wasn't your fault. You know that, right? If I had just admitted it. No, Megan said, stopping him. She looked into his eyes, her own filled with a fierce determination. Dad was looking for an excuse. If it wasn't the takeout, it would have been a muddy shoe, or a bad grade, or a broken dish.
He wanted to
hurt Zach. He wanted to show us his power. They are monsters, Andrew, and we are going to make sure they never see the light of day again. The trial of Arthur and Beatrice Reed began 3 months later.
It was dubbed by
the media as the cautionary tale murder. The courtroom was packed every day. On one side sat Arthur and Beatrice, dressed in prison orange, separated by their defense attorneys. The 3 months in jail had stripped away Arthur's smugness. His hair was graying, his face sunken, but his eyes still held a stubborn, defiant glint. Beatrice looked like a ghost, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands constantly shaking. She had spent the last 3 months trying to pin the entire blame on her husband, claiming she was a victim of his coercive control. Andrew and Megan sat on the prosecution side, accompanied by their lawyer. They refused to look at their parents, their gaze fixed forward. The prosecution's star piece of evidence was the Ledger of Discipline, which the police had found hidden behind the bookshelf in Arthur's study. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Vance, stood before the jury, holding the leather-bound book. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Vance began, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. This is not a case of parenting gone wrong. This is a case of systematic, calculated torture. In this book, written in the defendant Arthur Reed's own hand, we have a detailed record of how a 10-year-old boy was treated. Not as a son, not as a human being, but as a physical shield to absorb the mistakes of his siblings. She opened the book and began to read. June 14th, Andrew failed his history quiz. Locked Zach in the dog crate in the backyard for 6 hours. Temperature, 92 degrees. Andrew wept and promised to
study.
Lessons successful. A collective gasp ran through the courtroom. Several jurors covered their mouths. October 22nd, Megan was caught talking to a boy from the high school. Beatrice administered 50 milligrams of diazepam to Zach. Left him at the downtown homeless camp for 12 hours. Megan was hysterical upon his return. She has promised to focus on her studies. Lessons successful. Mom put her head on the table, sobbing loudly. I didn't want to do it. Arthur forced me. He said it was the only way to save the family. That is a lie. Arthur roared, slamming his hands on the table. You agreed. With me. You said the girl was getting out of hand. You bought the drugs.
Order.
Order in the court. The judge shouted, banging his gavel. Andrew watched them tear each other apart with a cold, dead satisfaction.
They
Were turning on each other, just as they had turned on Zach. The turning point of the trial came when Andrew took the stand. He walked up to the witness box, his steps firm. He was 17 now, but he looked older, his face hardened by grief. He took the oath, and then turned his gaze to the jury. Tell us about the night of Zach's death, Andrew, Ms. Vance said gently. Andrew took a deep breath. He described the takeout receipt, the poison, the smell of the chemical foam, and the sounds of Zach thrashing inside the room.
He
Spoke clearly, his voice never wavering, though the pain in his words was palpable. My father told us that if we didn't learn our lesson, Zach would stay in. There, Andrew said, his eyes finally shifting to look directly at Arthur.
He
Made us swear on Zach's life. He made us say, if I break this promise, may Zach die a terrible death. And then, even when we begged, even when we admitted everything, he locked the door. He sealed the window. He wanted Zach to suffer. He enjoyed the power it gave him over us. And your mother? Ms. Vance asked. My mother smiled, Andrew said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. She told us to stop being dramatic. She said expired. Poison wouldn't do anything. When I hit the wall and my hand started bleeding, she rushed to bandage me. She cried because my hand was bleeding while her other son was choking on his own blood 3 feet away behind a locked door. By the time Andrew stepped down, half the jury was in tears. The defense tried to argue that Arthur was a man obsessed with discipline who didn't realize the severity of his actions, and that Beatrice was a submissive wife who feared her husband. But the evidence was overwhelming. The autopsy, the ledger, the broken vent, and the testimony of the surviving children painted a picture of absolute horror. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of first-degree murder of Zach Reed, we find the defendant, Arthur Reed, guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder as an accomplice, we find the defendant, Beatrice Reed, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Megan burst into tears, hugging Andrew tightly. Andrew simply closed his eyes, a long, shaky breath escaping his lips. During the sentencing phase, the judge did not hold back. Arthur Reed, you are a monster who hid behind the guise of fatherhood, the judge said, his voice trembling with indignation. You took a vulnerable child and used him as a tool of psychological terror. You showed no mercy, and this court will show you none. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Beatrice Reed, you failed in the most sacred duty of a mother. You chose your husband's twisted games over the life of your son.
You watched him die and dismissed his agony.
I sentence you to 30 years to life. As they were led away, Arthur turned to look at Andrew and Megan one last time. I did it for you, he screamed, his face twisted in madness. You would be nothing without me, you ungrateful bastards. Andrew didn't look back. He took Megan's hand, and together they walked out of the courtroom into the bright, clean afternoon air. 2 years passed. The suburban house had been sold, the proceeds placed into a trust fund for Andrew and Megan. The punishment room had been torn down by the new owners, who completely renovated the house to erase the stain of the tragedy. Andrew and Megan moved to a quiet town near the coast, far away from the prying eyes of reporters and the ghosts of their past. Andrew was in college, now, studying psychology, wanting to understand the minds of people like his parents, and how to help children who had suffered like Zach. Megan was finishing high school, slowly finding her smile again, though she still slept with the lights
On
one chilly autumn afternoon, Andrew drove to a quiet, grassy cemetery overlooking the ocean. He walked down the winding stone path, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies and a single, sealed plastic cup of chocolate pudding, Zach's favorite treat, which he had rarely been allowed to eat. He stopped in front of a small, polished gray headstone. Zach Reed loved, remembered, and finally free. An innocent soul. Andrew knelt down, placing the flowers and the pudding at the base of the stone. He brushed away a few fallen leaves from the engraved letters. Hey, buddy, Andrew said softly, the wind rustling the trees around him.
It's been a while.
Megan is doing well. She got her driver's license last week. You would have laughed. She hit the curb twice during the test, but the instructor passed her anyway because she smiled so nicely. He sat down on the grass, wrapping his arms around his knees. They transferred Dad to a maximum security prison last month. Andrew continued, his voice quiet. He tried to appeal his sentence, but it was denied. Mom sent us a letter from her prison. She said she's sorry. She asked if we would visit her. I burned the letter, Zach. I didn't even show it to Megan.
They don't deserve our time.
They don't deserve to be remembered. He looked out at the ocean, where the waves were crashing against the rocks in a steady, soothing rhythm. I still think about that night, Andrew whispered, his eyes tearing up.
I
Still hear the sound of the alarm. I still feel the guilt, but I'm trying to let it go. I know you wouldn't want us to be trapped in that room forever. You paid the price to get us out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old wooden toy car.
It was
Zach's favorite toy, one of the few things he had managed to keep hidden from their father. Andrew placed the toy car gently on top of the headstone. We are going to live, Zach. We are going to be happy, and we are going to remember you every single day. Not as a cautionary example. Not as a splinter. Under the skin. Andrew stood up, wiping his face. He felt a gentle breeze brush against his cheek like a soft, warm hand. You are the strongest of us all, Andrew whispered. Sleep well, little brother. He turned and walked back down the path, leaving the quiet grave behind. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the headstone, illuminating the small wooden car and the white lilies standing bright against the cold, gray stone.